There's a hill in southeastern Turkey that broke a rule archaeologists thought was unbreakable. And the strangest part isn't a machine that decoded it. The strangest part is that no one had to invent anything to make this story terrifying. The real data does that on its own. Here's the rule it broke. Every textbook says the order goes like this. First you settle down, then you farm. Then farming gives you a food surplus. The surplus frees up specialists. The specialists build organization. And only after all of that do you get the surplus labor and the surplus time to raise something enormous and useless and beautiful. A monument. Cities first. Farms first. Monuments last. That was a staircase. Every civilization we knew about climbed it in that order. Then in the 1990s, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt started digging into a hill the local farmers called Gobekli Tepe, Potbelly Hill, near the city of Samyurfa. Farmers have been snapping their plow blades on the tops of buried stones for generations and just working around them. Nobody thought much of it. Schmidt thought it was worth a look. What he found underneath did not climb the staircase. It skipped it entirely. Radiocarbon dating puts the oldest layers of Gobekli Tepe somewhere around 9600 to 8200 BCE. Sit with that for a second, because the number alone doesn't land until you compare it to something. That makes this site roughly 6,000 years older than the pyramids of Giza. 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. To put it in human terms, more time separates Gobekli Tepe from the pyramids than separates the pyramids from us right now. Today, in this room. When these pillars were raised, agriculture as we understand it didn't exist yet. Pottery hadn't been invented. Metal tools were thousands of years in the future. There was no wheel. And by the current archaeological consensus, there was no settled town beneath it. Either this was built, at least initially, by hunter-gatherers. People with no farms, no permanent villages, and stone tools quarried, moved, carved, and raised limestone pillars that stand over 5 meters tall and weigh as much as 10 to 15 tons. They did the thing the rule says only settled, organized, specialized societies are capable of doing. And they did it first, before anyone. That single fact is already the discovery of a lifetime. You don't need artificial intelligence to make it disturbing. It already is. Now, before we go further, I want to be straight with you about something, because there's a version of this story going around right now that I'm not going to tell you. Over the last year, a specific kind of video has exploded across YouTube. AI just decoded Gobekli Tepe. Neural network reveals ancient star map. Machine learning proves the site is a warning about a comet. They all sound thrilling. There's just one problem. There is no such study. No peer-reviewed research team has fed Gobekli Tepe's data into an AI system and published findings about triangles, star charts, or hidden messages. That framing appears to have started as an internet game of telephone, real, published, and genuinely controversial statistical work by a researcher named Martin Sweatman, involving pattern matching and archaeoastronomy software, got relabeled AI somewhere between the journal article and the YouTube thumbnail, and it stuck. I'm telling you this not to disappoint you, but because I think the truth is better content, not worse. Because here's the thing. You don't need a fictional AI breakthrough to make Gobekli Tepe one of the most unsettling places on Earth. The real archaeology already does that. So let's actually look at it. Start with the pillars themselves. They're T-shaped, a tall vertical shaft capped by a horizontal crossbar, set at a right angle, forming the letter T. And they're not blank architecture. Many of them are carved with arms that bend down the sides of the shaft, hands brought together low near the front, fingers spread across the stone. Some wear carved belts. Some have garments carved hanging beneath the belt. These aren't columns. They're bodies. Faceless, abstract, monumental bodies with the crossbar standing in for a head. Archaeologists generally read them as stylized representations of ancestors, spirits, or deities. Nobody claims certainty on exactly what. But there is very little argument that they are meant to be beings, not decoration. And across the limestone around them, the site crawls with carved animals. Foxes with bared teeth. Snakes, sometimes in writhing vertical clusters. Scorpions with their tails curled. Wild boar. Vultures with wings spread and their bald heads unmistakable. cranes standing on jointed legs. Different enclosures tend to feature different dominant animals. One ring leans heavily toward foxes, another toward snakes and birds. Researchers have long debated whether this reflects deliberate symbolic assignment, clan or group totems, or simply which animals happen to be culturally significant to whichever group built which ring. What almost nobody in serious archaeology disputes is that this is a real, repeating, non-random pattern. We just don't know what it means. We may never know. That's not a failure of analysis. It's the honest, uncomfortable truth about reading the minds of people 11,000 years dead through pictures they left behind with no accompanying text. Now here's a piece of this story that is real, documented, and, I think, more unsettling than any invented AI claim. The way the site ended. For a long time, the assumption was that Gobekli Tepe was simply abandoned. People drifted away, the climate shifted, and over centuries wind and rain slowly filled the enclosures with dust and silt until the pillars vanished under the hill entirely. Quiet erosion, a forgotten place reclaimed by the landscape. The excavated fill tells a different story. Natural infill from weather has a signature. Fine, sorted layers, silt where wind laid it down, graded bands built up gradually over centuries. That is not what excavators found inside the enclosures. Instead, the fill is a dense, chaotic mix of rubble, broken stone, flint debris, and enormous quantities of animal bone, all jumbled together without the sorting that time and weather produce. That's not a sign of neglect. That's the signature of material that was deliberately brought in, carried up the hill, and packed into the enclosures on purpose. Klaus Schmidt himself proposed exactly this, that at least some of these enclosures were intentionally backfilled by the people who used them, essentially decommissioned rather than simply left to decay. Why would people go to the trouble of hauling in as much material to bury a monument as they hauled in to build it in the first place? Nobody knows for certain. Maybe it was ritual closure, a way of retiring a sacred space once its purpose was served, the same impulse that leads later cultures to consecrate and then formally close temples. Maybe each enclosure had a lifespan tied to the group that built it, and burying it was simply what you did when that chapter ended. It might not even have been literal burial, so much as gradual episodic infilling tied to renewal rituals. That debate is very much alive among the archaeologists who actually work the site. What we can say is that this was not abandonment. It took planning and labor. And whatever the reason, it had one accidental side effect that matters enormously to us right now, watching this video. It's the reason any of this survived. Sealed under that fill, the carvings were protected from 11,000 years of frost, rain, and erosion that would otherwise have ground softer surfaces to nothing. In a strange way, we only get to see this because someone a very long time ago made sure we wouldn't. There's more happening at this site than a single ceremonial hill, too. Göbekli Tepe is not alone. Scattered across the same region of southeastern Turkey are sibling sites, Karahan Tepe, Navali Kori, and others, collectively part of what Turkish researchers now call the Taz Tepeler, the Stone Hills Project, a major, ongoing excavation initiative. These sites share the T-shaped pillars, the anthropomorphic carving style, and construction techniques from the same broad cultural tradition, which tells us Gobekli Tepe wasn't an isolated, one-off genius project. It was one expression of a shared tradition spread across an entire region. And the archaeology here is still very much alive and changing. For years, the dominant model, largely built around Schmidt's own interpretation, was that Gobekli Tepe was a purely ceremonial gathering site with no permanent residence. Hunter-gatherers traveling in from up to 200 kilometers away, feasting, building, carving, and then dispersing again. Recent excavation seasons have complicated that picture. Archaeologists have since uncovered grinding stones, flint sickles, plant residues, and what look like domestic living quarters, suggesting the site may have supported at least some permanent or semi-permanent population, not just periodic ritual visitors. This matters because it reopens one of the biggest questions the site raised in the first place. Did organized religion and communal ritual come before farming and permanent settlement, rather than after? Some researchers now argue that the enormous cooperative labor needed to quarry and raise these pillars, and the enormous feasts implied by the sheer quantity of animal bone found at the site, may have been part of what drove the invention of agriculture in the first place, rather than the other way around. Not farming first, temple later. Possibly ritual first, and farming invented to feed the crowds the ritual kept summoning. If that turns out to be right, it doesn't just add a footnote to prehistory. It rewrites the motive behind the entire Neolithic revolution, meaning the invention of agriculture wasn't just about feeding growing families. It might have been about feeding belief. And there's still a genuinely open, hotly debated scientific question hanging over Pillar 43, the so-called vulture stone, a slab carved with a vulture, a scorpion, a disc, and a headless human figure. In 2017, and again in 2024, engineering researcher Martin Sweatman published papers arguing that the carvings encode a specific date, roughly 10,950 BCE, and that the imagery reflects a real astronomical event, potentially connected to the Younger Dryas, an abrupt and severe cooling period that struck the planet right around that time. His method used statistical pattern analysis and archaeoastronomy software, not artificial intelligence, and it remains controversial. The team that actually excavates the site, the German Archaeological Institute, published a formal rebuttal, arguing Sweatman cherry-picked pillars and ignored more conventional interpretations, including shamanistic and skull cult symbolism that shows up elsewhere at the site. Neither side has definitively won that argument. It's real, ongoing, unresolved scholarly debate, which frankly is far more interesting than a fake AI headline, because it means the mystery is still open, and it's being fought over by actual experts with actual evidence in real time right now. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a hill that is genuinely one of the most important archaeological sites ever found. Not because a machine cracked some hidden code, but because human beings with nothing but flint tools hauled and shaped 10-ton stones into monumental figures thousands of years before anyone thought that kind of coordinated effort was possible. It leaves us with a symbolic language of animals. We can see clearly enough to know it means something, and honestly enough to admit we can't read it. It leaves us with a site that was built with extraordinary skill, used for purposes we can only partially reconstruct, and then, at least in part, deliberately sealed by the very people who built it, sealed so thoroughly that it kept its secrets for 11,000 years, until it accidentally became the reason we get to ask these questions at all. Excavation continues today. Ground-penetrating surveys show additional buried structures at the site that haven't been excavated yet, meaning everything we've just talked about may still only be a fraction of what's actually down there. New finds keep surfacing. As recently as the 2025 excavation season, researchers uncovered a previously unknown human figure at the site, and the purely ceremonial model keeps getting revised as new residential evidence turns up. Some of the excavated material is even touring internationally right now. So, if you ever get the chance to stand in front of one of these pillars in person, take it. We don't need artificial intelligence to tell us Gobekli Tepe is extraordinary. We just need to actually look at what's already been dug up, tested, and published, and sit with the fact that 11,000 years ago, before farms, before writing, before the wheel, someone stood on a hilltop, organized dozens or hundreds of people, and built something meant to outlast them. And in one final act we still don't fully understand, they buried it. And in doing that, made sure it would outlast almost everything else humans have ever built. So here's the real question, the one nobody has an answer to yet, machine or otherwise. What were they trying to remember? And what were they so afraid of losing that they built something this permanent, and then hid it just to make sure it survived? Tell me what you think in the comments. I read all of them.